if Peter Lim had promised to finish the new Mestalla, to build a great team, to invest hundreds of millions of euros in trying to make possible the chance of Valencia being once again a Champions League contender, if he had written down those promises and signed them, that would have been another story. Unfortunately, he didn't, because as I said, the people who were selling him the club were trying to put everything the easiest to the bidder.
What's up, gente? Welcome back to Stan Sports. We're in beautiful Valencia in front of Mestalla, this historic stadium, and I'm glad to be joined by a journalist, Valencianista himself, PACO POLIT. PACO, great to have you here. Thank you.
Great to be here, Stan. Very happy to be. Obviously, on a place where I'm, very comfortable because we have the stadium just behind us.
We're playing on his turf.
Yes, and it's very. I think it's amazing to have the chance to be over here in mid-October, late October, with this kind of weather. Short sleeves.
A bit grey, let's be honest. A bit grey. It's not the sunniest day, but still,
Well, I don't think we're going to have a rain later today, so regardless, I think it's great. And you guys, if you are watching this, you should definitely come over at some point.
Definitely, guys. Valencia is not just a football destination. There's food, there's drinks, there's so many sites. The beach. We're gonna have a separate podcast about Valencia, but let's start with that because we're in the front of the stadium. It's the season where Valencia is commemorating Mestalla. It's the 100th anniversary since the beginning of this stadium. As a Valencianista yourself, what do you connect Mestalla with? What does Mestalla mean to you?
Obviously, whenever you think about the stadium, the ground, you think about the times that you came over when you were younger. In my case, I remember coming with my father back in the day when Mestalla was possibly one of the most atmospheric grounds in Spain. Nowadays, I actually believe it is. I think it's top 3 atmospheric grounds over here. But back in the day, it was different. Back in the day, you could actually have fireworks inside the stadium. You could have
something Valencians love. Let me tell you, there's fireworks every single day.
After 6 months here,
listen, I've been to fires, but I think Valencia's obsession with fireworks is crazy.
I understand that people might believe that we are a bit crazy, but I assure you that you get used to it. Whenever you spend here a couple of years, you definitely don't flinch when you have like a masclet that we often call like this big firework just exploding right next to you, and you don't even flinch. So back in the day, that was allowed inside the ground, and you could have the celebration whenever someone scored a goal. You had like fireworks, tracas, as we say here, and that was just a regular day in the ground. So in the 90s, I spent quite a lot of time inside, but late 90s, I was able to get my season ticket with 4 of my dearest friends, and the 5 of us have spent the last 22, 23 years consecutively with our season ticket. Even though lately I haven't been able to attend the games because I'm in the radio station inside as the director of the broadcast, but
not a bad view to have from the radio cabins as well.
Obviously, but it's not the same. Most of the time, you actually prefer being in your own seat because you get used to it. You get used to the people surrounding you, your neighbors. You often talk about the game, the players, everything that's happening, and it's definitely not the same. And most of the time, lately, I'm outside the ground in the radio station, and when you spend time there, it's definitely not the same. But to wrap it up, I think that most of my fondest memories related to football have happened inside this venue, and that's the reason for me not being particularly keen on moving on to the new one, which I believe it's a topic that we're going to cover.
Oh yeah, we're gonna talk about the new one, but I just have to agree with you. I think it's a historic stadium, and once you go in, you really appreciate it for what it is. You can breathe in the history of La Liga, and it's an amazing atmosphere on a match day. I think obviously in the last few years, maybe not as good as it's been maybe 20 years ago or something when Valencia was, rocking and beating the big teams. But yeah, let's talk about the new stadium because, it's been building for what, the past 15 years now, the No Mestalla.
Yeah, it kick-started back in 2006, I believe. The first works took place over in Cortes Valencianas, which is the long avenue where the new ground is being built. And they took place for around 3 years. And in February 2009 was when the works stopped, halted indefinitely, because Valencia didn't have the money to finish the ground, and that was the main reason. The funds for building it hadn't been secured. But that's the way Valencianos were back in the day, before the crisis and before we had those many problems over not only in Valencia but in the whole country. We just started building stuff, even though we didn't know if we would have the money to finish it. And that's why the new Mestalla has been unscathed and untouched for 13 years, which is quite a lot of time already.
Yeah, and there's been some updates this year. The Valencia club, there's been a press conference where they kind of, mentioned, okay, we're going to start to reinvest in the stadium, try to get it built soon, 80,000 capacity. 70? Okay, well, 70,000.
That's a topic of controversy, because there was an agreement which back in the day Peter Lim was supposed to keep, and he obviously didn't do it. So that's why Peter Lim took over Valencia in 2014, and we've been here already for the last 8 years, and the works haven't restarted. So it's a tricky issue, because Valencia first were telling the City Hall earlier this year that having a 52,000 in attendance capacity was more than enough, whereas the City Hall insisted on having 70. Why? Because the City Hall wants Valencia to be one of the venues where the 2030 World Cup can take place. And in order to be able to become a candidate to hold the semi-finals and the quarterfinals, you need a stadium which is larger than 60,000. So there's been friction between both parties. And finally, it seems that Valencia are now ready to, kickstart once again the works and finish it the way it was intended back in the day. Because it's not the same finishing the stadium in its original project, which was possibly one of the most impressive ones in Europe, than the latest ones that we've seen coming from the club. They have tried to, when you buy like a top-tier mobile phone and 1 year later you have that, like the light version, they were trying to give us a light version of a No Mestalla, and that's what both the fans and the city town hall don't want. Obviously they don't want that kind of downgrade from the original project, and that's why both parties haven't really gotten yet to that point of agreement. But the main issue is that the time keeps going on and going by, and we have no news regarding one of the biggest points of potential revenue in the future, and one of the, you could say, lifesavers for Valencia's both economic and sports situation, which is finishing finally the No Mestalla.
Yeah, and I think it would be a shame if the capacity is that small, because you're moving from Mestalla, you don't want to limit the amount of people that can come. If anything, you want to amplify it and get more people in the stadium, or at least keep the same amount of people. And then obviously kind of the rough construction, he's already done. If you go around the No Mestalla, you can see the stadium from the outside. It has already a look of a stadium. The skeleton is there, so it's not like he's starting from scratch. So hopefully we're gonna see it, because I think Valencia deserves it. It deserves it. The fans deserve it. It will be a shame, of course, if this gets sold and we see that
day will be quite a tragedy in the city, because many memories, not only for myself but most of Valencia fans, have this building very, very close to their hearts for many reasons. Obviously, not only because possibly it was the first time they attended a football game, the place where they went with their parents, with their peers, with their friends, the place where they bring their own kids. That's one of the sentences that many Valencianistas often say is in Valenciano, de pares a fills, which means from fathers to sons. It's like kind of legacy. It's a legacy tradition, which always takes place in this building, which would be to some extent like church.
Yeah.
Ultimately, every 15 days you come to church and you spend your 2 hours suffering, okay, with your side. But yeah, definitely it's going to be a tragic day because ultimately this ground back in the day had, which is a little known fact, 55,000 capacity, and it has been diminishing in the last 15 years because of security reasons, okay? But I've seen games over here with over 50,000 in attendance. For example, back in 2001 with the Champions League, or in the year 2000 in the Champions League semi-finals against Lazio, against Barca, against the following year against Leeds, Arsenal, sorry.
I was going to mention, as an Arsenal fan, I used to hate Valencia back in the
Over
day.
50,000 over here in attendance, and that has been decreased because of security reasons. And nowadays, I believe it's 45,000 tops, which is quite a lot because this stadium has that kind of impressive, vibrant sound when you have it in full attendance. And as I said earlier, the day when this is demolished, I believe that one of the last real tangible historical buildings of the city will go with it, because there's nothing that can be compared to what Mestalla means to many people, possibly the Valencian Cathedral or El Miguelete, but there are no real monuments. That's the truth. Over here in Valencia, we don't have those many monuments to visit whenever you come here sightseeing. You can go to Ciudad de las Artes y las Ciencias, you can go to a couple of venues, but you definitely have to come to see Mestalla because it's, remember, the oldest ground in the Spanish First Division. It's not the oldest ground in Spain because El Molinón, but yeah, they're in Segunda. So, you know,
So in La Liga,
top flight, First Division, oldest ground, here you have it, Mestalla. So you definitely have to take the advantage and come over whenever you have the chance.
Let's address the elephant in the room. You know, we talked about the glory days. You know, I said, as an Arsenal fan, Valencia was a bogey team, you know, for Arsenal. Used to beat us every now and then in Europe. John Carew with those headers, and I used to hate Valencia. But you know, it's been time since then. And in the last 10 years under Peter Lim, there's been a lot of turmoil in the club. You know, there's been a bad relationship with the fan. Something that, to be fair, has been improved a bit in the last year. Like, for example, I noticed in social media now, fans are allowed to comment. You know, the big. You know, I'm just saying, a big improvement. But you know, it's been the relationship with the fans, the results on the pitch. Obviously, you know, the last success in 2019, Copa del Rey. You know, big success for the club. But then, you know, it kind of leaves a bad taste in your mouth when the following year, you know, players are sold left, right, and center for pennies to other clubs and stuff like that. How, as a Valencianista, can you explain to someone that doesn't really know what's going on? Because, you know, I meet a lot of people and they're like, hey, what, you know, you live in Valencia, what's going on with Valencia? And, you know, why are they not up there? Why are they, you know, not there fighting with the big boys? What would you say to those people? What's been kind of the core reason behind the failure in the last few years?
You know, I think you don't have enough space in your hard drive for such a long explanation. Yeah. So I'm going to try to go the Cliff's Notes route with this. Okay, back in the day, in 2014, when Valencia were in a tight spot, both financially and sports-wise, for a number of reasons, someone decided that the club had to be sold. Okay, so then a buyout process, a bid, if you want to call it that way, kick-started, and unfortunately for Valencia's future, Peter Lim's offer was backed by the person who was then the president of the club, who was Amadeo Salvo. As you might know, if you have sold at some point your own business or you have been in any transaction, you can never be part of the process and at the same time part of the bidder. Because in that transition, there's a so clear as day conflict of interest in that case, but it also you know, subtracts you of any kind of objectiveness, trying to both perform your own task as the president back in the day and also you are never going to thoroughly defend the interests of the club in this case. So that's what happened ultimately. Amadeo Salvo was part of the process. He wanted to the club to be sold to Peter Lim, and it might be a coincidence or not, but Peter Lim was the winner in the bid. So unfortunately for Valencia as a club, and unfortunately for Valencia fans as a collective, most of the promises which were made back then didn't have their equivalent on a written contract. And that was the main issue. If Peter Lim had promised to finish the new Mestalla, to build a great team, to invest hundreds of millions of euros in trying to make possible the chance of Valencia being once again a Champions League contender, if he had written down those promises and signed them, that would have been another story. Unfortunately, he didn't, because as I said, the people who were selling him the club were trying to put everything the easiest to the bidder. And that's why Peter Lim took over Valencia. His initial investment was okay. It wasn't, that bad. He brought in Rodrigo Moreno, Andre Gomez. He sacked Pizzi, unfortunately, which was a manager I really liked, and brought in Nuno Espirito Santo, which English fans, Premier League fans might know from his Wolves tenure. And the first year things more or less worked. But they weren't going to obviously work always, and they went south very quickly. And actually his second year was already an absolute failure. English fans might remember that Gary Neville himself was Valencia's manager for a couple of months.
It seems like a long time ago now, doesn't it?
It seems like another lifetime. Yeah. And by the way, I totally respect Gary Neville as a pundit, as a former player. I think he's one of Manchester United's absolute legends. But yeah, sometimes when I see him in social media criticizing the Glazers and talking about how the people are getting stripped from the from football, the identity of Manchester United, I would surely love Gary Neville to say the same from his own business partner Peter Lim, who is doing exactly the same over here, but he never speaks about that. I guess he
He took the check at the time and failed and went back home.
I guess he might not have the time because he's a very busy guy. But yeah, when Gary Neville came over, that season was quite disastrous. The 2015-2016 was finished by Paco Ayestaran. It was also a disaster because the following year, the first 4 games were 4 defeats, and he was sacked. Cesare Prandelli came in, and he left. He resigned. He actually resigned because he got promised things by Peter Lim which he didn't own up to, and that's why Cesare Prandelli, who has this resume and his story as a manager, we don't have to go over it. He said that he wasn't ready to stand up to many of the things that were happening. So Cesare Prandelli left. Many of those tenures, Bodo was the caretaker, legendary player. He was the first team's delegate, and he was the guy in charge of being the caretaker when the coming and going of different managers. So finally in 2017, 2 people came over. One of them, Mateo Alemany, Barca's current CEO, and Marcelino García Toral, the manager, okay? And those 2 guys single-handedly turned things, the other way around. And Valencia went from being a losing side, you could say an absolute chaos, both on an organizational and sports level. And they transformed the team and the club into a force to be reckoned with. And that's why Valencia suddenly, changed their fate, and they became Champions League contenders. They finished 4th 2 consecutive years, and as you said earlier, Valencia were able to actually win the Copa del Rey in 2019. And when things were looking possibly the brightest under Peter Lim, Valencia were on their centenary year, 2019. They were in the Champions League playing the group round. You were Copa del Rey champions, and suddenly Peter Lim decided to burn everything to the ground. That's the best way to put it. Actually, I can't come up with another expression.
Yeah, because it doesn't even make business sense.
It doesn't
the
make
way
sense.
he was selling players.
Any angle that you try at looking at this event, it doesn't make sense. Because he decided to sack consecutively first Marcelino under an absurd pretext of losing confidence on him, and both Pablo Longoria, who was the sports director, and Mateo Alemán, who was the CEO, they followed suit. So in a matter of 2 months, all the guys who had been able to build with quite a lot of effort and pain and sweat and tears and blood a champion side, they were out of the club. So what happened then? Things went on a downward spiral, chaos ensued. You had Anil Murthy as the president, which is an individual which I think we shouldn't touch that much upon, because
He's gone now.
Yeah, because nothing I can say about him will be positive, unfortunately for Valencia. And yeah, when you burn every single bridge that surrounds you, often you become isolated, you are on your own, and you are miserable. And that's what has happened in the last 3 seasons with Valencia. First under Celades, the following year under Javi Gracia, and lately last season under José Bordalás, who was able to get a squad with absolutely zero investment, with loans, young players, young prospects, youth academy promises, all of them. He managed to create a tight squad, and they were able to chug along and get into another final, Copa del Rey final. Unfortunately, Valencia were unable to win it, but I think he did a good job, and he was sacked regardless.
And again, back to square one this summer, right? And this is the worrying thing about Valencia, because as you said, behind the scenes there's serious problems that it doesn't really matter who you appoint as a coach, who because they work on a string shoe budget. They're not allowed to, kind of stay at the club for 2-3 years, build a system. So when you're working under such conditions, it's very difficult to expect results on the pitch. And to be fair to Pepe Bordalás, like you said, came for a year, proved himself, I think, because, after his experience at Getafe, a lot of people had question marks. Is it just a flash in the pan? Can he do it again? Proved that he did, left in the summer, back to square one. But listen, enough with the past. Present is here. Gennaro Gattuso coming this summer. I have to say, pleasantly surprised by the guy. I know he had a few attempts in the Serie A, with different success, but I did not expect him to play a very attacking, positive football in which Valencia is trying to be the protagonist. And I think that's what's kind of been the highlight in the first 10, 11 games of La Liga, 10 games. Valencia is trying to play attacking football. They're scoring goals. They're inconsistent, as we said. You can, explain it with a lot of reasons. How have you seen Gennaro Gattuso's Valencia in the first weeks? How have you seen Gattuso himself as a kind of coach, and how do you think he can deal with those things behind the scenes that we just talked about?
Well, I think that it's been a pleasant surprise to see the way the lads have developed under Gattuso in the last 3 months, especially because most of the fans expected Gattuso coming from the Italian Serie A to be that kind of defensive catenaccio representative, and it couldn't be further away from that. I think that Gattuso likes to play a specific play style which we have to go back over 30 years to having seen over here back when Gus Hiddink was in charge in the first few seasons of the 90s. Very attractive football, always attacking, always on the move, always trying to be protagonist with the ball, trying to have ball possession. And so far it worked in order to surprise most of the opposition. But unfortunately, Gattuso doesn't have I think it's a matter of experience. Gattuso is a very experienced former player, but he's really not that experienced as a manager. Even though he's already been for, I believe, 9 years as a coach. I think he is struggling in some of the games against more veteran managers in La Liga. For example, against Aguirre the other day against Mallorca. You could see the way the game changed in the second half when Valencia suddenly got in control with that Cavani goal from the penalty spot, and then El Vasco Aguirre suddenly clicked with a triple sub changing the tactics, changing the play scheme, and suddenly Mallorca were in charge. And that's the way Mallorca were able to, turn around the score. First, Murici scored the penalty, even it was a bit dubious, and later Kangi Lee got the second one. So I think that Gattuso is going to learn quite a lot this season. And at the same time, the guys under his command are going to also develop as players. But again, we are once again talking about superficial issues, which are what happens on the pitch, and we have to then delve deeper into more structural problems. One of them, in Valencia's case, as Stan said, is the lack of investment, the lack of paying up for players who might become potential leaders of the squad. In Valencia's case, you have quite a few loans, and most of them are starters.
Yeah.
Nico is a starter, Samu Lino is a starter. You have many players on loan, which you have to definitely, command them and try to extract every single drop of performance this season, because most of the time you know that the following year they're not going to be with you, and that's an issue because you don't have that kind of continuity that we are talking about. The only more or less important investment which happened this summer was Andrea Almeida, and Andrea Almeida might be a star in the future, but at this point you can still see the green in him. So you need to, get him to be more experienced by playing games, and that's the main issue with Valencia.
And at the same time, Valencia again sells their best player this summer, right? And
Carlos Soler, Gonzalo Guedes. They were able to extend Galla's contract, but that's an issue which lies mainly on Gallá being absolutely crazy for Valencia, not in the fact that Valencia's management did well with the negotiations, because...
And you can't fault these guys, sorry to interrupt you, even Soler, okay, he might be a Valencian guy, he might be from the academy, but at the end of the day, he's a professional player, he's in the peak of his career, he wants to play, he wants to be at the top level, he wants to bring the big trophy, so, I think fans are understanding of this, and
instead of being a Valencianista for these guys, for example, Carlos Soler and José Luis Gallá, two very similar examples, but they're different at their core. Instead of being an asset, being a Valencianista for those guys is a liability whenever they are sitting on their talks to extend their contract. Because Valencia's management take advantage of that. Take advantage of the fact that they feel the club inside of them and try to squeeze every single drop out of the talks. And in Carlos Soler's case, he decided to leave. And in José Luis Gallá's case, he decided to, okay, I'm fine, I'm in my comfort zone, I want to stay here all my life, so that's why he was able to stay. But I definitely don't blame any of the players who leave, especially the guys who are homegrown, because Carlos Soler has plodded along possibly several of the worst seasons I've seen in Valencia as a fan and as a journalist. And who can blame the guy who spent here his last 6 seasons being one of the highlights of the team, when Paris Saint-Germain, who aren't, they might play a farmers league, as some people say, but they are definitely not a farmers team, okay? One of the most massive sides in Europe, and they come to your doorstep and tell you that you are going to increase your salary times 3, and that you are going to play alongside Messi, Neymar, Mbappe, and the likes. You're going to play the Champions League. So that's what attracts that kind of players. But in Gallá's case, he's a rara avis, it's something that you don't really see that often. And I respect José Luis Gallá a lot for having extended his contract, and I also respect Carlos Soler for pursuing his career, because he has every single right to do so. But it's very difficult to build a squad in a reliable way and with continuity for several seasons, when every single summer you have so many changes. And that's the main issue which has plagued Valencia for the last 4 years, since 3-4 years since Mateo Alemany and Marcelino left.
Yeah, I think fair play to Gattuso as well, because he knew what he was getting into. I watched his first press conference. The media was on him. Have you talked to Peter Lim? What's going on at this club? Why are you coming, basically?
Yeah, but his relationship with Peter Lim is much closer than the other managers who followed Marcelino. For example, Celades came as a recommendation by Jorge Mendes, First time we mentioned him, and we've been here for 20 minutes, which is quite good. But Javi Gracia was signed with Peter Lim's green light, okay, but he wasn't his choice. Bordalás was signed with Peter Lim's green light, but again, he wasn't his choice. Gattuso is Peter Lim's choice. You know, he knows the guy. They know them. They know each other, and Gattuso has the privilege of going to Singapore. He's been already twice, I believe, and sitting in the same table as Peter Lim and talk to him one-on-one on the same level. Because Gattuso is very close with Jorge Mendes, and Jorge Mendes is Peter Lim's dear friend and business partner. So in that sense, Gattuso has an advantage with which Bordalás and Javi Gracia didn't. Okay, and at the same time, I also believe that Gattuso has realized in the first 3 months here that it doesn't really matter how well he does his job. Eventually, he will need more tools, and that is one of the potential points of friction which will come around when the World Cup break happens. Because I think Valencia will have to decide, Peter Lim in this case will have to decide if their economical struggles which are happening are going to be a liability to their sports planning. Because Valencia will need more players. They will need to be reinforced to some extent, I believe, in the winter transfer market. We have seen that there are a couple of positions on the pitch which are a bit lackluster because of the lack of experience and also the lack of sheer number of players. You don't have a deep squad. That's the truth. And even though you are playing only La Liga and Copa del Rey when the time comes around, if you want to build something consistent over time, you will need more players and you will need more depth of bench. And that is going to be interesting to watch when January comes around, if Valencia decides to invest to some extent in reinforcing the squad to see if this season they are able to get into European spots. Because at this point, and we have the first 11 games to see as an example, you know it's not good enough. It's not deep enough, good enough, experienced enough, and overall it's not good enough.